them here. And we've asked Mike to lead off with a really important topic that we have touched on in the past, but Mike is going to give his perspective. He's had a lot of contacts statewide, and this issue of herbicide-resistant weeds is real, and it's not going away, and it deserves our attention. So, Mike, I think we're going to let you run.
All right, can you hear me, Paul?
I can.
Good. All right. So again, I'm not much into this technology stuff, so bear with me. We'll try to push through this. Well, thanks again, Paul, for having me, and Dale and April for having me on the agenda today. And hopefully we can address some of these questions and concerns that people have in regards to managing herbicide-resistant weeds here in New York State. So basically, what we have today is I'm going to go over. I've got a few talks today. The first one, we're going to handle the resistant weed management. We're going to go over a few of the weeds that we need to be on the lookout for. I know that Paul and Dale have assured me that they don't have any of these resistant weeds that we're going to talk about in your area yet, but I can just tell you that I know that a couple of them, at least one of them, is going to be on its way, and it's going to be inevitable that you guys are going to be dealing with it in the next couple of years. There's a couple of the others that we're going to talk about that hopefully we have an opportunity to maybe address or manage. So what we're going to do is we'll go through this. There'll be plenty of time for questions for it. I will also be available anytime, either by phone call or email after this today, or you can go through Paul and Dale as well. So basically, just to start off, I didn't have a picture, so I don't know if so they tried to get me to do a picture of these fancy backdrops that April and Dale and Paul and Joe and everybody use. So I didn't have any, so I just put on a picture slide. So that's the guy talking, right? So going into 2019, these are, just looking back at last year. I'm just going to start out with this slide that I think really summed up our corn planting season in northern New York. I'm sure it summed up a lot of corn planting for a lot of people throughout New York State in 2019. So, these are the overused phrases for the 2019 corn planting season. Bring a chain, bring a second chain. It's not perfect, but it's done. That was wetter than I thought. While there's dust coming off that field, just send it. And if it stops raining today, maybe we'll be able to go in a week. And so I think that really nicely summed up, how the season went. It was a challenge for all of us. I know that the growers, made it through the spring, didn't know how they made it through the spring. And, fortunately at the end of the year, despite a lot of the unplanted fields that we had in the North Country, we had some farms that made out a lot better than they thought come July 1st. It was looking really bad, especially when we had a lot of corn planters still going the end of June, beginning of July. We had soybeans that were attempted to be planted in northern New York in July, and that didn't end very well for us. But anyway, that's what we had for the 2019. 2020, I keep telling my growers in the North Country, it can't get any worse than 2019, but I don't know. We'll see. So anyway, so how does herbicide resistance develop? So this is going to be just a couple of exercises that I want to do to just kind of make everybody, aware of, how it all starts, and really some of the management techniques that we can use, or management strategies we can use to help minimize the risk of having to deal with them on your farm. So first off, how does the resistance develop? Herbicides do not create resistance, okay? Individual plants are naturally resistant and are present in very low numbers in the field. These herbicides that we use select for the resistant individuals. And here's an example that we have that I had from a picture that I took, just driving the roadsides here in 2019 in the North Country. So this is a field that we had, not an uncommon sight in 2019, again, with a lot of the unplanted fields. This was mid to late summer this picture was taken. So this was an unplanted field. The grower said, well, we have a lot of weeds in the field. They wanted to manage the weeds. So again, something not uncommon. We saw a lot of herbicide applications going on these unplanted fields, trying to control the weeds that were there because they wanted to, cut down on the seed spread of any of these weeds. And so you look at this field, and it was pretty evident that the only herbicide used was glyphosate in this field. It was an application of glyphosate, and it may be a little hard to see, but those green surviving weeds there are mare's tail, and so that's horseweed or mare's tail, and so that's what we had. So we've actually just shows how we have these resistant plants in that field. Doesn't look like a lot in this field right now, but just the nature of the way mare's tail produces seeds and spreads, you know, this is going to be a lot bigger challenge for this grower in 2020. So this is again not an uncommon sight that we saw, you know, throughout the 2019 growing season. So resistant management requires many tactics, and it's not going to be just the chemical tactics. We're going to be looking at cultural tactics, crop rotation, and we do a really good job with crop rotation. You know, inherently, a lot of our farms that we're working with are dairy, livestock operations, even our cash crop grain operations. You know, we do a really good job, I think, with crop rotation, mixing it up. It's not, you know, we do have some that go out a little longer than we want, but you know, for the most part, we do have a lot of different crops that we do grow in New York State. We also use mechanical tactics. Tillage prior to planting kills a lot of these emerged weeds. You know, however, we are starting to see, you know, less and less tillage taking place, and that's going to start to change the landscape a little bit, and it's going to make it a little bit more difficult to control some of these weeds that we're going to be talking about. Chemical tactics. So we talk about the chemical tactics, and that's going to be really, you know, centered around proper herbicide application, using herbicides with different sites of action, and that's an important part that we'll talk about. And then tank mixing different herbicides with different sites of action and activities on the same weed that we're targeting. So the mode of action versus site of action, just to clarify a couple of the terminology. Mode of action is the process within the plant that's impaired or inhibited by the herbicide. Basically, how does the herbicide work? And then site of action, that we're going to use that term more, is where the physical location within the plant where the herbicide binds. So it's basically where the herbicide is working in the plant. So we're going to look at site of action. And so this is a classification that the Weed Science Society of America has an approved numbering system to classify herbicides by their site of action. So we have a group number for herbicides with the same site of action. And so what we see, and this goes back many, many years, you know, I remember, you know, for a long time, you know, Russ Hahn, you know, our, you know, Cornell weed scientist, boy, he would sit there at grower meetings for many years, and he talked about this site of action and this numbering system for herbicides. And I think a lot of us just sat back and said, well, it really wasn't, we didn't think it was really important, you know, at the time. You know, he was making a big deal about these group numbers and trying to, you know, and so we kind of ignored it for many years. And all of a sudden now, as we start to enter, you know, this new, you know, these new weed, you know, multiple resistant weeds that we're dealing with, you know, that's when all of a sudden the light bulb comes on and says, okay, now I understand why. Because now what we do is a lot of times, and as I work through with consultants and growers that I work with, you know, we really talk a lot about our tank mixes now as spraying by the numbers. We really have to know these group numbers that we're using, because it's going to be so important to coming up with programs to address these resistant weeds that we are now dealing with in certain areas of the state. And unfortunately, we have some of these weeds in the state that are resistant to multiple. So it's not just glyphosate resistant. You know, everybody thinks, well, immediately, well, it's just glyphosate resistant to Roundup, right? But no, we now have some populations of weeds that are resistant to more than just glyphosate. In fact, we have some that are resistant to a couple, maybe even 3, and we're working on, you know, trying to sort that all out too, and that's going to be information coming in the future. Okay, so the newest pigweeds, this is the 2 new ones that we want to talk about, or just address a little bit. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the Waterhemp and Palmer Amaranth, but again, I just want to bring this to your attention. So on the left, that is Mike Stanyard. He's our counterpart in the Northwest New York team with Cornell Cooperative Extension, and you can see the tall Waterhemp. It's tall Waterhemp and Palmer Amaranth. They're both in the pigweed family. On the right, is a photo of Palmer Amaranth. That's Bill Johnson from Purdue. He's 6'6". So you can see that they can be fairly big pigweed plants that we're looking at. So tall water hemp. Here's some of the the growth threats and weaknesses, I guess, if you want to say, of water hemp and why it can be a concern for us. Okay, so the growth, it's got rapid early season growth. It can grow 1 to 1.25 inches per day. Okay, the threats, and this is the challenge that we're going to be dealing with, is that it emerges throughout the season. So we can get emergence, from spring right through late summer. It's a prolific seed producer. It'll produce upwards of 250,000 seeds per plant, and the resistant traits transfer by pollen. And then you look at a weakness. So we want to try to find these weaknesses. So we identify weaknesses of some of these plants, and how do we use the weaknesses to our advantage to help control these species moving forward. So the one weakness of tall water hemp is it doesn't emerge from low soil depth, and they're also short-lived in the seed bank, maybe upwards of 5 years. So that we can try to use that seed bank management seems to be one method that we're going to employ to really help reduce the risk of the spread of the tall water hemp here. Palmer Amaranth, this is the one that we really, of the two, they're both nasty weeds. Palmer is going to be worse to deal with. Palmer is much more aggressive than tall water hemp. Its growth up to 2.5 inches per day growth. So it doesn't take long for it to get too tall to control in a post-emergent situation. So timing of application to herbicide of the herbicides is going to be utmost important, and we have to react really fast when we see it, because again, it's going to go from kind of the right timing, hit it for post-emergence, and a couple days later it could be a lot taller, and you're going to be challenged with trying to control those larger plants in the field. Threats similar to tall water hemp, it emerges throughout the season, 100,000 seeds per plant, and again the resistant traits transfer by pollen. Weaknesses similar to tall water hemp, it doesn't emerge from low soil depth and short-lived seed bank, 4 to 5 years in the soil. So it's going to be seed bank management for that as well. So we look at tall water hemp locations here in the state. This is the most current map that we have. It may be in other counties that we've yet to identify, likely is. And this gets populated and updated as frequent as we can do. Anytime we find a new infestation, we make changes to this map. So this is the map as of February 17th, 2020. You can see the locations of tall water hemp in the state. Here's a Jefferson County, and this is one that I found in the Jefferson County area in the middle of July, or the end of July of 2019, and it was isolated. So when we see, going back to the map, when we see these, it doesn't mean that it's widespread on every farm. It can be just one isolated location, and in our situation, it was isolated to just a couple of fields that we had on the same farm, adjacent fields. Looking at how this arrived into the area for us, this one came through the source of the seed for that was brought in by a combine that was purchased from out of state, and that's going to be a common transport mechanism for a lot of our pigweed species, the water hemp and the Palmer Amaranth that we are bringing here into the state. And here's our known Palmer Amaranth locations in New York State, and you can see that we have 3 counties with known Palmer Amaranth populations. This is a picture of taken from our counterpart Josh Putman in the Southwest New York team. This was taken in Steuben County in the fall of 2019, and this is just a photo that I put in here just to show the seriousness of how these weeds can produce seeds. So you can look at this. This was taken a field. He took this picture in dry beans. It was a dry bean field. Took a picture of that Palmer Amaranth, and it's hard to tell from the angle of the photo here, but it's a very small, short plant. what it was a late emerging Palmer Amaranth plant in the field, but you can see that, boy, it's put out a seed head, and it does have that ability to germinate late in the season and still produce viable seeds. And so again, weed seed bank management, if that's going to be our strategy to manage these pigweeds, it's going to be critically important for us to have full season weed control. And these pigweed species are really going to change the way we look at weed control. And what I mean by that is we look at right now, for weed control, if you're a corn or a soybean grower and you put out an application of an herbicide, the acceptable control, if we were to get 90% control, you'd be thrilled, right? That's probably a very good goal to have. That would be really nice weed control to protect our yield. But now with these pigweeds, tall waterhemp and Palmer Amaranth, we have to come up with more of a zero tolerance. We don't want anything surviving in that field. So 90% or less than 90% is not really acceptable control from a standpoint of trying to stop the spread of these weeds, because those remaining plants, again, given the fact that we can have 250,000 seeds per plant from tall waterhemp and over 100,000 for Palmer. Again, seed bank management, that doesn't go very well in our favor when we leave those weeds in the field. So it's going to change again our whole strategy as to how we're going to control these weeds. So possible ways they get here. I mentioned combines from other states. That's one way. Imported hay, possibly. Not likely, but it's a possibility. Cottonseed and dairy rations. Fortunately, in talking with a lot of our nutritionists and dairy people, we don't see a lot of whole cottonseed used right now currently in the dairy rations. But again, that is one possible means of bringing seed in. There's actually one of the tall water hemp locations in the state, the dairy, kind of an isolated area, hasn't brought in any equipment from outside the area, hasn't had any custom applications on his farm. Believes that maybe the transport of tall water hemp to his farm was through cottonseed that the dairy was using. Seed mixes, possibly. And then another one that's really interesting is waterfowl. And you think that, how does waterfowl bring these seeds in, bring these pigweed seeds to our area? And it's a really interesting study that was done in the South, in the University of Missouri, and some other cooperating states down there looked at this. And waterfowl, mallards, and snow geese, some of these waterfowl seek pigweed seeds as a preferred food source. Okay, and what the study had is they found that as these waterfowl foraged on some of these fields that had these pigweeds present, they would eat the seeds. And when it went into the digestive tract, it was really interesting to find that the small seed, and pigweed seeds are very small seeds, and they did, in their trials they actually fed waterfowl different seeds, different weed seeds, and then they looked at it in the backside of the bird as it went through the digestive tract, and they found that actually the small seeded weeds actually stayed a lot longer in the digestive system, where the larger seeds went and passed through very quickly. And based on their information that they had, is that the potential to disperse viable Palmer and water hemp seeds was over 1,700 miles, based on how long it was in the digestive tract. So they could eat pigweed seeds down in Missouri, and they would take off flying, and I couldn't believe how fast some of these waterfowl can fly, and how fast and how long periods of time they could go. Very interesting. So when I see this study, I was actually first saw it presented at a conference I was at in Canada. I saw that, and it was piqued my interest on it. And then I was at another meeting in Western New York a year ago in Batavia, and I had talked about this, and I had a grower come up to me afterwards and says, "Look, I'm an avid birder," and I showed the map of the locations at that time a year ago where the water hemp was found here in New York State. And he said, look, he says, it almost lines up where a lot of our snow geese population is, the flyways in the state. And so, I just kind of looked at it myself. And, again, is this, directly related? I don't know. But on the left, this is the snow goose harvest season map from the New York State DEC. And on the right, you can see our tall water hemp map. I just thought that was interesting. Is it directly related? I don't know, but it kind of makes you wonder, was that a possible way that some of these, pigweeds made it to New York State? So documented herbicide resistance is a palmer, amaranth, and tall water hemp. And this is an exercise that I just want to go through to show how important, or not important, just show how tough these can become, for control when we start dealing with more than just glyphosate-resistant palmer or glyphosate-resistant tall water hemp. So on the left-hand side of that table, you have the group numbers. The examples would be some of the common names of the herbicides. And so that these herbicides here represent, products that would control palmer, amaranth, and tall water hemp. And then if there's an X next to the box, it means that there are populations that would be resistant to that group number on the left. So the top line, we have palmer amaranth in the United States that's resistant to group 2, and tall water hemp resistant to group 2. The scary part would be now is that now we have populations in Kansas, for example, palmer amaranth is resistant to 5 different sites of action. So you could have one field in Kansas that has palmer amaranth that's all of a sudden resistant to all 5 of those sites of action. And then, not to be outdone, in 2018, they found a field in Missouri where they confirmed tall water hemp resistant to 6 sites of action. And then just the next slide would be 5 sites of action resistant palmer amaranth in Arkansas. And so you can see that if we start to get, the more sites of action that these become resistant to, our choices become a lot more limited as to what we can use to control these weeds. So tall water hemp control options. So if you were to ask Paul or Dale, if I had tall water hemp in corn, what would be some of my corn options that or herbicide options we could use? And this is all is the list that we would have that we could use in New York State on corn for the control of tall water hemp. Now, mind you, if that field was the field in Missouri resistant to 6 different sites of action, we can start going through this progression here, that if we lose the group 2s, then our list gets smaller. And then if we lose the group 4s, our list gets smaller. 5s, 9, 14, 27. So you can see how now we're down to, that particular field in Missouri. These will be some of our choices that we have left. And it went from quite a lengthy list to a very short list now. And now you look at our list here that would be left, our top 3 on the left-hand side would be harness, the dual 2 magnum, and outlook. That would be our group 15s. And this is one that I do want to point out that people say, well, geez, we don't think of the group 15s or those herbicides, the harness, the dual 2 magnum, or the outlooks, as really, control of water hemp. We think of those immediately as that's what we're going to use for grass control. We're going to use it for nut sedge, but actually they do have activity on our pigweed species, fortunately. And then we have the other one on the list, and the next one down is Lorox, and I don't know the last time or if it's ever been used much on corn here in the state. Prowl is another one, and then on the right we have Bucktrill and we have Liberty. So now here's another site of action exercise that I go through with growers to just demonstrate, as we start to put together some of these tank mix programs, excuse me, tank mix programs, how effective is it going to be, on the weeds? This would be looking at, tall water hemp in a soybean situation that would be resistant to the group 2 and group 9. So we're going to talk about group 2, group 9, tall water hemp exercise in soybeans. So, You could put together a program early post. You could come in with extreme herbicide, which is Pursuit and glyphosate. Okay, Pursuit's a group 2, the imazapyr, glyphosate a group 9. Then come back in with a late post application of Flexstar GT, which is Flexstar plus glyphosate, which is a group 14 and a group 9. So you can see that we have, 4 different active ingredients. We have a 2-pass program, and you think that's a pretty good program, for resistance management. You look on the right, we have, of the 4 groups that are listed there, we have 3 different sites of action. But however, if that population of tall water hemp that we were going after was resistant to the group 2 and group 9, it leaves us the only thing left in the tank right now, or in that whole program, would be the Flexstar application late post. So that's the group 14. So now we want to try to beef that up a little bit. And now we look at a 3-pass situation where we're looking at a burn down program, assuming it would be a no-till situation. So we put down an application of Roundup Power Max, which is a group 9, 2,4-D ester, group 4, Valor XLT, which is a classic Valor combination. That's a group 2 and a group 14 pre-pack. Coming back in with an early post application of Warrant Ultra, which is Warrant plus Reflex, and then a late post application to clean things up with Cobra, which is a group 14. So now you can see that we have three passes, 3 different timings that we have. We have a burn down, and in that burn down, we're using 4 different sites of action. But we have, group 2 and group 9 resistant tall water hemp that we're looking at still leaves us a group 4 and a group 14 in there in that burn down program. In the early post, we're pretty protected because we have a group 15 and a group 14, and then we're coming back in with a late post. So of the Cobra. So that if you look at this exercise now we've got a better tank mixes, that would help control the multiple resistant tall water hemp that we'd be dealing with. And I guess if anyone were to look at it, really a weakness in this program, and unfortunately it's going to be done more and more, and the weakness on this one would be is that we actually have we're using a group 14 3 different times in each of the tank mixes. So it's going to put a lot more selection pressure on our group 14s. We've not identified any group 14 resistant tall water hemp in New York State. However, there is group 14, the PPO inhibitors that are resistant to tall water hemp and Palmer Amaranth in the country. So that is a possible risk that we have. So, okay, so how fast can these resistant weeds spread? And I think when I was there, I was down in Delaware County a few years ago, and I think I showed a similar progression of this map. I'm using an exercise with mare's tail, the spread of mare's tail, resistant mare's tail in Ontario. And so this is glyphosate resistant mare's tail would be the red counties. And if the county shows up on this map is yellow, it's going to be multiple resistant mare's tail. So this will show how the fast this can spread through the state, because, we look at, when we first found glyphosate resistant mare's tail in Western New York, it started to move across the state, and we know that the way mare's tail can move is the seed is similar to dandelions. It can blow very, very far distances. It can easily travel 50 or 100 miles by the wind, so it can really spread by wind. Its wind-blown seed is the main movement of that seed. So as it started in Western New York, I kept thinking, boy, we're going to be in good shape in the North Country, because, we're going to get the winds that come across. It's going to follow the thruway. It's going to work its way down into Delaware County, and Dale and Paul are going to have to deal with it before we do. It's not the case right now, but anyway, I'll show you how quick it can spread. And this is why I think that again, just be on the lookout for it in your area, because it's on its way. This is 2010, 2011 in the province. You can see how fast. 2012, 13, 14. Now it's all the way up into Quebec, 15 and 16. So you can see just, from 2010 to 2016, how fast it spread through the province of Ontario and into Quebec. And we're seeing that similar progression through New York State, because it started in Western New York several years ago. and now it's along the thruway corridor all the way into the Herkimer County area. Now we have it up into the North Country now, and it's also along the southern tier. So these are this is a slide from Russ Hahn that he shows, and this shows again how fast some of these weeds can spread. This is a picture of Palmer Amaranth in a commercial complaint field in 2011 in Illinois, and that was 2011. You could see the seriousness of the Palmer in that field. That's that same field in 2012. So you can see how quickly, just within a year, it went from bad to really bad. The other thing too, if you look at some of the spread, in Iowa, for example, the state of Iowa, in 5 years, it was from the first time it was detected in 5 years, I think it was 70, close to 75 counties it reached in just a 5-year period. So here's a picture of tall water hemp. This is a photo that Mike Stanyard took in Western New York, and this is tall water hemp in corn, or it could be corn planted in a tall water hemp field. I'm not sure which, but you can see how how thick that can get and how aggressive that weed can get. And a lot of the fields that we were finding tall water hemp in Western New York and Central New York, when we look at this tall water hemp in corn or soybeans, it's just amazing to see how predominant that weed can be as the primary weed in the fields. It just seems to take over everything. It pushes out all these other weeds. It is so aggressive. So you can see how yield limiting that could be. So factors favoring the spread and predominance of these weeds: plant and growth and development, the fast growth rate. The other thing too is I mentioned with Palmer and tall water hemp is that they the resistant traits transfer by pollen. So with tall water hemp and Palmer Amaranth, they're dioecious, meaning that we have male and female plants. And so pollen movement between the male and female plants can exchange those traits, those resistant traits. And again, some of the challenges, they can be resistant to multiple sites of action. And our production practices, our current trend to reduce tillage favors small seeded weeds. So the weed control programs are going to be based on post-emergent herbicides, and then we've kind of gone away from, the use of residual herbicides, and that's what's been happening here. We've kind of as we move to no-till, it's no-till and herbicide tolerant crops, corn being Roundup Ready corn, for example. We've kind of forgotten about doing these pre-emergent herbicide programs. So management requirements for this is going to be the first line of defense is proper identification, detect and take action to prevent new and permanent infestations. This is interesting. 90% control of our new pigweeds is still not good enough to stop seed spread. We can't rely on a one-pass program for season-long control. And that's a quote from Peter Sikkema, the University of Guelph weed scientist. Again, weed seed bank management is critical, and we're going to have to remember to start using more than one effective site of action in every tank mix. And we need to start that now, even if we don't have tall water hemp or Palmer on the farm now. So non-chemical control practices, rotate crops, deep tillage. So that's going to be something that we aren't going to see as much of as we move to this conservation tillage or minimum tillage. Hand weeding, and people are going to think we're crazy, but if we have Palmer or tall water hemp, and if it's a small spot of the field and it's not controlled either through some form of cultivation, tillage, or an herbicide, if it's an escape, hand weeding or hand roguing the field is not not going to be out of the question, and it would certainly help go a long way to trying to reduce that weed seed bank. So we want, again, zero tolerance. We don't want any of those plants to survive. Cleaning the combine between fields if it's a heavily infested, or at least at the end of the season, we have to do a really good job at cleaning out our combines. And harvest order, you would harvest your worst fields first with the heaviest infestations last. Again, I'll skip through this pretty quickly. This is just chemical control of Palmer or tall water hemp and corn, just one slide on it, just to show kind of how you'd put the program together. If you're going to plant a Roundup Ready or a Liberty Link stack corn hybrid, we have to emphasize that we're going to plant into a clean seed bed. It's going to be a 2-pass program. It's going to be using full rates of a minimum of 2 effective herbicide sites of action, followed by a post. We have to be, again, very timely before these reach 3 inches tall, and we want to use 2 effective post sites of action in each tank mix. And then the group 15, our duals, our warrants, our outlooks are going to be also likely tank mixed into there for that additional season-long soil residual control. Just another one. This is a photo that I took this summer of a tall waterhemp plant in one of our fields. You can see that, again, you know, a very small plant. It's doing all it can to put out a seed head. It just wants to produce viable seed. So if that didn't get controlled, you know, there's a seed or a plant producing seeds for us. So moving on quickly to mare's tail. This is another one, and this is the one that's going to spread a lot quicker than the waterhemp and the palm or amaranth. And this is just kind of a picture of on the right, mare's tail rather, in a soybean field. That's a photo taken by Mike Standard in Western New York. And so this is what it looks like as a rosette. Okay, so the challenge that we have with mare's tail is that it'll germinate 2 different times of the year. We'll see it germinate in the late summer and go into the fall as a seedling rosette, like that top left-hand quarter picture. And then in the spring, those will start to regrow, send out a seed head pretty quickly, or a bolt really quickly. And those are the tough ones that we're going to deal with in a no-till situation, because they're going to get a head start. And sometimes when we come back in with our burn down program, you know, for soybeans in particular, some of those rosettes that you know were there all winter, they've already taken off. They're a lot taller, and as the mare's tail gets taller for a burn down program, sometimes it's a little bit tougher to control those. You know, those as opposed to a summer annual, the spring germinating mare's tail. So here's a photo of a field in Jefferson County, and you know, in 2019, beginning of the 2019 growing season, we had yet to identify resistant mare's tail in any of the northern 6 counties that I work in. This was a photo taken in September of 2019, and you can see that there's a fair amount of resistant mare's tail in that field, and that's a field that they had a problem in that field before, and it just went unnoticed. And that's the thing that we find with mare's tail. And I was talking with Dale and Paul yesterday that's going to be the challenge that we deal with, is that, you know, you can have these very small patches of mare's tail that maybe escapes in a field that are truly, you know, resistant populations. You know, it goes, you know, unnoticed, or we just ignore it because it's a small spot in the field. And then, you know, a year or two, they just explode in a field. And we have that, and those stories are all around the state that you can talk to growers that are dealing with it now. And there's some fields that are a lot worse than this. I mean, this is, you know, can be considered one, you know, some farms will say that's a light infestation from what they've seen on their farms. And so the mare's tail, again, we talked about the growth. It can emerge April through June, and then we get that late summer germination. Excuse me, the threats up to 200,000 seeds per plant, approximately 80% germinate, and the wind-blown seeds disperse great distances. The weaknesses: doesn't tolerate tillage, and it doesn't tolerate shading. And so the other thing too, yeah, I'll talk about some of the burn down, I guess, with the tillage as well. Here's another one that was very interesting observation that we had. And you can see along these guardrails, this is along one of the highways that we have here in the North Country, and you can see along the guardrail, you know, basically one species, and that's been sprayed with an application of a generic Roundup that the Highway Department used, and we started to see a lot of that this year. You can see that in our right-of-ways, and it doesn't matter what part of the state you're in. You could drive around, whether it's down the thruway or down I-81 or some of our county highways or state highways. I just ask you to kind of just look at the guardrails once in a while, just to see if you're starting to see that, because that's, you know, a possible place that a lot of our infestations are coming from. And so we, you know, sit there and we, you know, a lot of times the farmers get blamed for it. It's, you know, it's the farmer's problem that they've started or created this resistance by using, you know, Roundup only, you know, whereas you look at this situation, you know, look at all the viable seed production that's placed there. You can look at our right-of-way situations that, you know, this is an ideal scenario to produce resistant weeds because again, it's continuous. There's no rotation. It's the same chemical every year, and it's no-till, right? And so then you look at another one. This was kind of an interesting, you know, story. So I was driving into the town of Smithville, and along the bottom of that speed limit sign, you can see drawn up to the bottom of it was resistant mare's tail there. So I stopped the vehicle and I took a picture of it and I sent it to some of our growers right down the road. And I said, "Welcome to Smithville, you know, home of the resistant mare's tail." And I gave this same talk in Smithville actually in December of 2019. So it was just, you know, a couple months later, I gave that talk and I had this this photo there. And the one grower that I had sent that picture to, he came up to me after the meeting and he shows me, he says, "Well, I want to show you that." He goes, "You know that picture you showed about the speed limit sign with that mare's tail?" I said, "Yeah." He shows me a picture of it, and he had gone up that same day that I sent him the picture. He had gone up and he had pulled all those mare's tail plants out of the bottom of that sign, around the bottom of that sign, and had a big pile stacked up there. So, you know, I told him, I said it was a nice effort, but I said, you know, it's a wind-blown seed, and you know, if it was Waterhemp or Palmer Amaranth, we would have, you know, really commended him for doing the hand roguing. But you know, with mare's tail, you know, I wouldn't spend any time trying to hand pull mare's tail out of a field because of the way it can move. So here's another example of along some guardrails along one of the highways. And you can see, I always ask our growers, you know, when I show them this picture, okay, what do you think started first? Which came first, you know, in the chicken and egg thing? You know, did the resistant mare's tail in that soybean field get to the guardrails first, or was it the guardrails and it blows into the edge of that field? And I think we know the answer to that one. Again, here's just some of these other smaller patches of fields that you know, that we saw or observed, and you know, maybe you've seen them in some of your cornfields or soybean fields in your area, and you've kind of just, you know, ignored it, you know, and you know, it's or you know, probably it's not you, it's not on your farm, it's always the neighbors. So your neighbors probably look a lot more like that than yours would, right? So multiple resistant mare's tail programs, you can see on the right. I mean, that's a pretty bad situation of mare's tail, how tough that can get into a field. So controlling mare's tail, it's going to be, you know, we can't plant into actively growing weeds. That's the first thing that we have to mention is don't plant green. You can't plant into actively growing mare's tail. It's just going to set yourself up for a disaster. So it's essential for a good start that we control the weeds first, and you can do it with either intensive tillage prior to planting, or we can put down a residual with a pre-plant burn down program, or you can do it separate. You can do it, you know, and going into soybeans or even going into corn, we would do the same principle of using tillage prior to planting or applying the residual or a burn down separate. And so when I say intensive tillage, I mean intensive tillage because we have a lot of growers that are starting to use conservation tillage practices and going away from maybe the mobile bore plows or the chisels or even the offset disc. And we're starting to see a lot of vertical tillage used. You know, again, whether it's a Salford RTS or a turbo till or a, you know, a speed till system, we start to see a lot of that that vertical tillage, and you know, a one pass vertical tillage pass prior to planting isn't intensive enough tillage to control those rosettes of that mare's tail that's there. So if you had any overwintering mare's tail, it's not enough. It kind of pushes them aside, but it doesn't uproot them and control that population. So, you know, we have to do intensive tillage if we're going to do any. And, you know, in many cases, it's not the tillage taking place anymore. It's going to be using, you know, the reliance of a burn down program. So here's one. This is an application made on July 18th. This is just a plot area to show, you know, the burn down and trying to control mare's tail, because we had, you know, again, that time of the summer, we had a lot of prevented plant fields that were getting these applications of just Roundup. And that first slide I showed there, the picture of the mare's tail where the grower had made an application. You could tell when he made it. I mean, the weeds were very tall at the time of application. We were way beyond the labeled height limit for that as well. So you look at an application of 32 ounces of Roundup Power Max, included an ounce of Sharpen, okay, which is one of our group 14 herbicides, an ounce of Sharpen, 1% MSO, and 2 pounds per acre of AMS. This was applied on July 18th. You come back in of July 22nd, you look at that mare's tail and you think, boy, we've done a really good job. We've really, smoked it pretty good with that application. And then you come back August 5th. So from July, 22nd, it looks like that on the left-hand side. August 5th, you can see that same area. And what you see here is, and it's interesting, if I can bring my cursor here, you can see there's where we thought we killed the plant. And then you see all these little stems that had emerged, okay, and they bolt out. So it really, all we did is just made it mad, and it's going to produce, viable seed heads off of all of those shoots. So it's a tough situation that we were dealing with.
Mike, there's a question for
Yeah,
you. You want to
sure.
take it now, or if you want to
No,
hold
I could take it. Yeah, I could take it. Go ahead. Yeah.
Does natural weed control like cover crops such as rye work on any of these 3 weeds?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm glad that was asked. So cover crops, yes. Our fall cover crops is going to be critical for helping manage mare's tail. Some to an extent, the tall water hemp and palmer, but not as much. It's going to be mostly the mare's tail, and why I say that is that if we can get a cover crop planted early in the fall, that what that does is that crowds out any of those germinating mare's tail going into the fall. So they've done some studies suggesting that it can control up to 75%, using like a rye, cereal rye clover mix, or just a cereal rye cover crop planted in the fall can reduce the winter annual mare's tail by upwards of 75%. So that's a great question, and yes, it can. So now we look at, just the last couple of slides, and I know you guys want to go to lunch here, and you're tired of hearing me talk about this, but resistant mare's tail, again, it's spreading across New York State. No effective post-emergent herbicides to control multiple resistant mare's tail in glyphosate tolerant soybeans or conventional soybeans. And so what we know is that much of our mare's tail across the state is resistant to, our resistant mare's tail is resistant to both glyphosate and unfortunately the group 2s. And our group 2 herbicides are one of our main, outside of Roundup, our group 2s are our main go-to for a lot of our soybean weed control programs. And so when we take the group 2s and the group 9s away from us, it really limits it. And so for the 2020 growing season, and we've been talking to growers this winter about it, if you're dealing with it, is that, if we think we have, or we know we have multiple resistant mare's tail, your options are pretty limited. So you would be considered planting an Extend, Enlist, or a Liberty Link soybeans, follow with an effective post-emergent control option if necessary. Because if somebody were to plant a Roundup Ready only soybean field, or have a conventional soybean field, and you come back in and you have multiple resistant mare's tail that comes into that field, you don't have any effective options that are going to control that in the field. So just one last slide on just a quick thing on our burn down on it. I know there's not a lot of soybeans grown in the Delaware County area, but I just have this one slide on that just to show kind of how complex some of our burn down systems are going to get. So we would use, some of our options would be using glyphosate, 2,4-D LVE, and then one of our flumioxazin products, such as Valor XLT, and Viver Surveil. Also be using some metribuzin, premixes containing metribuzin and flumioxazin. You can also use a glyphosate or Liberty with a Sharpen and 2,4-D LVE. And then also you could use Chromoxone, 2,4-D LVE, and metribuzin. So you could be using, again, different, different burn downs. And again, we're putting a residual with all of those. So the final thoughts is resistant usually starts at home. Denial isn't equal to management. Manage like we already have resistance. Again, use 2 or more effective sites of action each time in the tank mix. Rotate crops and traits, and don't be cheap and don't cut corners. And when I say don't, use 2 or more effective sites of action each time, I think we really have to stop now and ask ourselves when we make any applications to corn or soybeans, if all you're putting in that tank right now is just glyphosate for any single application, we really have to ask ourselves, why are we doing that? And we really need to be putting something else in the tank mix to help that out. And in some cases it's going to be adding more than just one more site of action. Sometimes it's a pre-pack of some other stuff, and I'll talk about that a little bit more after lunch when we talk about some of the corn weed programs. So anyhow, that's all I have. I could take it for questions.
Any questions for Mike? Mike, just to clarify that last comment you made,
Sure.
basically you're telling us that if we do a burn down early in the season, we should be moving away from glyphosate alone. We should maybe throw in some 2,4-D or something with it.
Yeah, glyphosate, this is the burn down. And to even take it farther, Paul, that if I'm growing corn, if I have Roundup Ready corn on the farm or Roundup Ready soybeans, and I'm making a post-emergence application for some reason to clean something up, it would really probably not be in our best interest to use just straight glyphosate by itself in the tank mix. We need to put something else in that tank, another site of action to help control some of these possible weeds that could be out in the field. We have to do a really good job at scouting our fields. That's something that I know we had talked about yesterday, on the phone, that scouting is going to be critical. We have to get out there and know exactly what we have in the field, identify it first. And, it doesn't matter if, especially even if it's just, before, if we were doing post-emergent application in corn or soybeans and it's Roundup Ready, we looked, we have some green weeds in the field and really didn't care what they were, went out, we just put the Roundup in the tank and we took care of it. Now we have to go out there ahead of time and say, before we even make that application of Roundup, what else do I need in there to help, control those weeds? And in some cases, it's going to be, putting in a residual with that, if we're going to be dealing with, Waterhemp or Palmer.
Great point, Mike. And I think it points out, again, what we've always said about the importance of scouting. And I would just do a shout out to you growers out there that, your eyes in the field are important to us. And we appreciate when you bring attention of any pest issue to our attention to take a look at. We don't get into every single field in the summer, so we might not see something. But now you've seen the mare's tail, which is the one we really should be paying attention for. Probably Mike's telling us the one we're likely going to see first. So if you're seeing that, please let us know so we can come out and follow up with you.
And I know one other thing to just follow
Sure.
on to that, Paul, that I will say, and I tell all of our growers and our crop consultants that when you bring that to our attention, some people don't want to announce that to people that, geez, I have a problem in my field, because you don't want to get scrutinized or criticized by your neighbor, right? So I always tell people that if you make a call, we go out and we identify it. Again, I've not shared any of these, I make sure if I take a picture of these fields, we don't identify the field as to where it was so that nobody knows. We're not in the coffee shops talking about, Joe Smith down the road, boy, he's doing a, crappy job at controlling these weeds. So again, confidentiality is important for that, because again, it's a sensitive subject for some farms, that maybe don't want to say anything about it, that they have a, an herbicide resistant weed like that, like mare's tail or Waterhemp or something. But again, sharing that information with us to help, come up with an effective control program for you is going to be the, what we're doing it for. So again, I just wanted to share that.